So, you know, what I saw was fascinating. I didn't see any of the stigma. Like, I didn't see what I was taught in DARE. Like, I didn't see what I was taught in church.
You couldn't find the negative things that everybody was telling you. The reefer madness aspect of it wasn't there.
Well, at the time...
You're like, I'm using this stuff to get me off of drugs, not to get me on them. Yo, 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 welcome to the Jug Dealers Podcast. We're back again. We're here to talk about all things cannabis and just the whole, you know, kind of tell the story of different people who have come up through the game. So today we brought
quite literally in this situation.
Yep. Today we have brought my really good friend Eugene Monroe out here. You know, in the spirit of telling the different stories of cannabis, but we want to start off by first off introducing Eugene Monroe, you know, former NFL lineman. But let's jump right in.
Yeah.
Where you grow up and how you grew up. Why don't you give us a little glimpse into that and kind of what drugs were growing up around Eugene Monroe?
Okay.
What kind of town is Plainfield?
It's changed over time. It's being gentrified very rapidly, by the way, and there's a ton of opportunity there in development. But what I'm seeing is properties being developed that, man, there were missing roofs in these warehouse buildings that were industrial, and, you know, those businesses moved out of town. And over time, the city just became more and more kind of run down.
Blighted, but yeah, for lack of a better term, it was pretty blighted. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. Which has happened to,
like a lot of places on the East Coast.
Yeah, a lot of the steel towns, a lot of the manufacturing towns, a lot of that stuff that we see, you know, throughout the Rust Belt of America. You unfortunately see. Hell, we were in, you know, rolled through Gary, Indiana last week when we were all through. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
You know,
so certainly in Plainfield, you know, that's the case.
Yep.
You have a lot of very, you know, beat up old buildings, and then in the midst of that, these neighborhoods that at the time, you know, were just riddled with, you know, you name it. The drug war hit the community hard. And I was in the midst of it.
And this would have been in the 1980s, right? You're 36
90s,
years old?
90s.
So mainly 90s. Okay, so late 80s, 90s. You're 36, which means you're 1986. 87. Okay.
And dude, these are all, I mean, I can attest to that because these are places I used to go in Philly to get weed, and like these are places you shouldn't hang out.
Well, yeah. I mean, I remember the same thing about, you know, I mean, unfortunately, these are the places you had to go, you know, where weed was where other drugs were, and it definitely brought you to some of these places. But fortunately, you know, that's not where we were living. So you were in the middle of that situation, correct?
Yeah. So not only was it in the community, it was in my home on a very daily basis. So, you know, you name it, certainly cannabis was present. And I sort of got a twofold view of it that I didn't realize till much later. My father was going through his cancer treatment. And although he was already smoking cannabis before that, he would go to it when he was in pain.
Yeah,
sure.
I remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, he'd be like, "Gene, I need my Easy Wider." So I'd go to his bedroom, open the drawer, pull out his box. You know, he had his stash and he had his Easy Wider papers in there, and I'd take it to him in the bathroom because he was having a tough time. You know, a lot of those medications you take really destroy your GI tract. So,
yep,
absolutely.
It was helping him find relief. You know, even though previously the use was recreational, I see that, and now I like to say that all use has some medical use, whether you know, are cognizant of that factor or not.
Well, there's beneficial
inflammation in your body; it's going to attack that, and you know, that's one of the main reasons I was drawn to cannabis. Previously hating it because of everything I'm talking about now. Right? I didn't like the fact that my dad wanted me to get his Easy Widers.
Yeah.
Because what I saw was friends and family, you know, lives ruined in our community time after time over, you know, these flowers that it just baked into my brain that, you know, this is something that I need to stay away from.
Yeah, it's going to get you in trouble.
But now, wouldn't you also say that you associated it not necessarily on its own as well? It was associated with other drugs as well. So did it all kind of get lumped together?
It did. It did. So there was another drug very present in my house, and that was crack.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So, you know, all drugs sort of fell into that same category.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
These are just tearing people apart. I'm walking to school, seeing the same people that were served the night before out searching, and it's 6:30, 7 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, you know, foaming at the mouth at times, hardly able to speak clearly. And I'm seeing this daily. Like, this is literally going on every day. And, you know, from one family in the neighborhood to the next, there was a parent or family member who was being served, who was addicted, and their life in shambles. So, yeah, it was.
So if it's not addiction, it's jail, pretty much. So one or the other.
One or the other,
and that's no future. That's no future that you wanted to see for yourself.
No, no.
So let me ask you a question along that. So, like, you know, you're growing up around here. How, you know, because I know, you know, our kids are friends, and I see the size of our kids. How big is a young Eugene Monroe in 8th grade? Because this, you know, it makes a difference.
That's funny, man. I was definitely the big kid in the neighborhood.
I'm not surprised.
And to a point,
your daughter's as tall as I am. She's 11.
No, Farrah is sprouting up, man. It's a marvel to see. She's towering over her mom now.
Yeah.
There's no sign of that stopping.
Right. Yeah. The growth plates have some room to still
it's giving her an advantage in the pool, too. My daughter swims.
Yeah.
And, you know, she wins a lot.
She wins a lot. I watched her this summer. She kicks ass.
Those wins have been encouraging her to take it more serious.
Absolutely.
But I can kind of see, like, as she gets older, you know, that work has to, you know, change a little bit as that advantage of her being taller starts to get cut down with kids with better technique, for example.
Sure.
So it's just cool to see her actually care about that fact and put in the work.
Right. So I mean, you know, you're a big 8th grader. Yeah. How does football start to play into your life, and how does it really save you from,
of course, that's what I was going to ask you. And
save you from this future. Even
backing up slightly, a lot of brothers and sisters, like, what home life was fairly chaotic. Where did you land in that situation?
I'm the youngest of 16.
Okay. Wow.
And ironically enough, not even the tallest of 16.
I was going to ask, I was like, so are you also the biggest of 16?
and no, I'm not the largest by size or height. Definitely have brothers that tower over me too.
Yeah.
Some big guys in the family.
Yeah. Wow.
Big
Okay. So obviously,
but hold on, just for clarity, mom or dad. So how many siblings by mom? And the 16.
So my father had a lot of children. The 16 that I count are the ones that I know of. I'll just leave it at that. 10 of us were boys, 6 of us.
So how many by your mom?
My mother had just 2.
Yeah.
Myself and my bro, Steph.
Yeah,
Stefan was living in Jacksonville.
Yep.
Okay. And so when did you start playing football? I mean, I'm thinking, because I know at that time, you know, when I started playing as a kid, you know, there were definitely some opportunities, you know, starting in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. But like, what was it? Was it siblings that got you into it? Did you have a major influence in your life? Like, who at that moment kind of was like, you know, you should go out, you should try this?
So there are a couple of factors going there.
Mm-hmm.
3rd grade comes around, and I'm clearly the biggest 3rd grader anyone's ever seen at that point. And I'll never forget, Coach Bazell saw me at the time. He was subbing my class, and he's like, "There's no way this kid's not playing football." I was too big to play, so they wouldn't allow me to play with the older kids. I was too heavy to play with the kids my age. Now, if I did play with those older kids, the same thing would have happened. It was happening in street ball. And so all those kids were the kids on the actual teams too. So 2 years goes by. It's the summer of 5th grade. And my cousin Philip Anderson, he's like, Gene, like, you got to play. middle school allowed anyone to play. It didn't matter how much you weighed.
Right, because like Pop Warner and stuff did have weight limits and things like that. Yeah,
different divisions based on age and weight.
Yeah, even when I was playing, I remember in 8th grade, it was you couldn't run the ball unless you were 135 pounds or below.
Yeah, they cut that out in middle school.
Yeah, all gone.
So it was, I was well on my way to 300 pounds. I mean, I wasn't that big then. But I was obviously the biggest kid in the neighborhood, probably in the city. There's some other big kids too, but they didn't play ball. And although I didn't play organized football, I would always play in the streets. And we would dominate people because, I was just overpowering people out there.
Sure.
And all our fast guys. So the same thing happened. Like I was blocking in the streets, and then I'll never forget the first day I put on pads. I signed up for ball in 6th grade after training with my cousin Philip, who I mentioned, and I run on the field late. And the very first drill in organized football I get to do is bull in the ring.
What poor sap was on the other side of that?
I'm in the middle of the ring, just spinning and spinning, and coach is calling kids out. And I think he just did it because he was, just astonished.
Right.
I don't know how else to put it. It was unfair. It was definitely an unfair advantage, which continued and continued and continued until I saw an opportunity in it and started taking it serious. And then it just.
So when did that click? When did that click? I mean, because that can start happening as early as, even in 8th grade, you can start seeing, and I know that okay, so you've already got that kind of attention at a young age. We it's well known the levels that the major colleges will go for scouting, and even what the NFL is looking at, even at a certain age, even in that age level. I mean, that kind of recruitment starts happening. No,
so it happened at the end of that 6th grade year. Our high school had gone on to a state championship.
Okay,
and I was watching those games, and at the same time, I had a coach. Coach Holt, who was always talking about watching film. And Coach Holt had film of Anthony Munoz that was in the coach's office. So I was sitting there watching this tape, watching Anthony and his coach over and over again. So in the 6th grade, I find myself in the coach's office working on technique. And then I was also watching our high school play, and I'm like, I'm better than these guys. And they were on their way to college. And that was it. I dedicated myself to training my body. So, the double workouts you're seeing, man, that stuff started way back then.
Long time ago.
Yeah. And I mean, dude, you encourage my kid to work out at a lot. And like, dude, it's it's pervasive the way that it is with you. And it's one of the things I appreciate about being your friend. But I can see that has been your ethos.
And that was one thing I was going to say too. It's like, it's one thing to, you had a blessing, you were big, right? But there's plenty of other big people that have never taken advantage of that. You were big and it clicked at a point in time where you said, okay, I'm going to work to sculpt myself and be who I want to be. But you also saw an ability to, that was your ticket out. No, you said, okay, this is it.
I always work to maximize myself in whatever endeavor. So whether it was school, right? I was a straight A student. I was competing with the other students at the top of the class. Some that went on to schools like Princeton and MIT. So it was no different, right? Just because it's ball.
It's definitely no different. I've got to put in
the time, the work, and certainly no one was going to put in more than I was. That's just how I was built. From working with my father, and I'll rewind the story a little bit.
Please do.
To how I go from, the environment I was in to, seeing that there was opportunity beyond my surroundings, right? And so working with my father was my exposure to that.
Yep. And your father was a Mason. I know this because I was a Mason.
Yeah, he did masonry work, and, we'd go off to repair work in a home in Sleepy Hollow, which is like the super nice neighborhood that, you don't find too many Plainfield residents there, but it's Plainfield. A lot of celebrities and high net worth people had homes there. So I go, and I'll never forget this particular house. This kid's room was the size of our whole apartment. Like he had his own bathroom and his own like sitting room where he had his like game set up, and then he had a separate like toy section, and then this massive bedroom, and it's just like,
you're like, holy.
I mean,
how is this kid living like this?
So at this point, are you kind of thinking to yourself like, hey man, the NFL could be my ticket? I mean, are you thinking to yourself NFL?
No. This was years before that, before I ever cared about playing a sport.
This is just astonishment that a kid actually had that.
Yeah, I never seen
it was the other
like
side, right? It was like, this is how the other side lives.
Here you are sleeping in a bed where your feet hang over the end.
I just knew that what was going on in my neighborhood wouldn't get me there.
Right. So there was a realization, just didn't have anything to do with sports at that moment. It was that hard work can take you places. There is another life out there.
Man, I could care less about sports growing up.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I did martial arts, but organized sports was not my thing. I tried basketball in 5th grade. That did not work.
I've seen you play basketball.
Kind of forced to play ball. I was forced in the 3rd grade to go take that physical and, you know, find out that I couldn't play with the older kids. And again, going into 6th grade even, that's why I was late to the field, even though I talked about it and worked out with my cousin Phil, like,
when it actually came down to it,
you're like, I'd rather be playing Mario Brothers, bro.
Dude, I wanted to get straight A's and come home and play games.
Right.
I was a nerd. I was getting into computers, and so sports was the furthest thing from my mind. Yeah.
What happens in high school? I mean, that's obviously a changing point for you.
Yeah, I mean, in high school, my scholastic effort continued. And at that point, like, we had kids from both middle schools combining from all over the city.
Right.
So now I'm competing in the classroom with new kids.
You're starting to see kids closer to your size? Even on a competing teams?
So there was one kid from Elizabeth, Carlos Feliciano, who actually
Carlos.
He was almost he was another like really big kid. But again, my team, you know, we had an advantage up front that most, you know, schools didn't. We had one guy under 300 pounds.
I mean, did I?
One guy under 300 pounds.
When I first met you and started hanging out, I looked up some of yours. I was a little more fanboy back then, but I looked up some of your stats. Am I correct in remembering that you did not allow a sack in high school? Is that a real?
Something crazy like that.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy.
But is that you or is that the entire offensive line?
It's me.
Yeah, it's okay. I told you. Look, I was like, there's no way somebody can fuck up an assignment one time.
If you got a right-handed quarterback, you know, he's the guy protecting him. So.
Well, and I mean, and I think we'll get to this a little bit more too.
I think that's evolved a little bit though.
Right.
You've got so many athletes on defense, and you can't just be told if the quarterback's looking to the left, now his blind spot's his right side.
Yeah,
good point.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, and we can get into this a little bit more later. I don't want to jump ahead, but, you know, I was a fan of the Derek Thomas times, you know, it was that backside. And that's just, you know, keying up basically a downed outside linebacker. And but that changed the game. That evolved the game a lot. That evolved your position a ton, especially by the time you got in.
Athlete to play the position.
Yes, it did. All right. So back to high school. Yeah.
So I'm on a team with a huge offensive line, and as a result, we're getting a lot of attention.
Yep. So it wasn't just you; it was
I had
the
a
team
scholarship offer before playing varsity. So there were a lot of kids in our high school. Wow. So our coach wouldn't let freshmen play varsity.
Right.
But at the end of the freshman year, he would let the freshmen who he thought were able go and practice with the older kids. Rutgers was there at those practices watching some of the other kids. So, you know, at that point, you know, it was pretty much
Rutgers is right there too. Rutgers is Jersey.
Yeah, it's in Jersey for sure.
Right there.
Yep.
Yeah. And I liked Rutgers. It ultimately just ended up being just far too close, and I wanted a different experience away from what I knew.
Sure.
So how did that evolves into you going to Virginia, right?
Yeah, UVA. Love it. Love my experience.
What a beautiful town. What a town, man.
I love the countryside around it. Beautiful farmland. I love Virginia.
So you're down there, you know, I was talking to someone, we were talking to Chandler about it earlier today. You worked your way through college. This was not what it is today where kids are, starting to get sponsored and stuff. You know, you,
nice.
Yeah, you.
There's no
you
NILs. There's no. There's no throwing a watch on people.
There wasn't any like, you know, brown paper bag money coming through.
None of that. This was not Alabama.
So you're in college. At what point do you know you're going to the NFL? Like, at what point are you going, hey man, this is let's get paid?
My first year at UVA was a bit of a rude awakening. So
you finally got on with people that were on your level or more so than you'd ever been before. Yeah.
Well, I don't think I've talked about it this way before, but looking back, I didn't prepare properly. Right. So I lived and breathed weights. After my senior season was done, after the U.S. Army All-American Bowl was done, I had already selected Virginia prior to all of that madness anyway. I knew where I was going. And so I just lifted and lifted and lifted and lifted and lifted and lifted and got huge and strong.
But you also got stiff.
Running.
But you got stiff.
I wasn't stiff, but I was not running.
But not running. Okay.
So like,
if you
talk to any of my old teammates, man, there were nicknames for me for how badly conditioned I was, which became one of my very best tools later on in my career.
Right.
Got to a point where there was no one.
You were the Moose back then?
Yeah, they call me Moose, man. Yeah, you've heard some people call me Moose.
I hear every once in a while I get some of the deep.
You're like, that's someone who really knows.
The deep cut friends will come through and they call him Moose.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah. A little more cardio, a little more plyometrics, and you'd have been in a better spot. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to say the athleticism wasn't there. Sure. Just,
but man,
when it was time to do conditioning, I was tapping out.
So so just out of curiosity, you know, we're building a timeline here. Is that when you started seeing some injury? Is that when you started seeing some of the issues from just being a big guy playing ball against big guys?
First year, I get a little bit of experience. The Brickishaw-Ferguson started, and I got to learn a ton playing behind him. What an epic time. He was a great mentor and friend. But spring ball comes up, and the first day of padded practice, I blow my knee out.
Oh,
Yep.
ACL, MCL, all of it.
Dislocated my kneecap, tore the patella retinaculum, tore my VMO. They replaced my kneecap with bone plugs from my femur.
Okay.
And it was just an ugly injury. And they handle this injury differently now.
Sure, of course.
But, you know, I've got this nasty scar from it and, you know, daily pain from it.
Right. And I'm glad you bring that up, not because of the pain, but this is also a time where, again, cannabis is by no means any thought in your life.
It's not in the picture.
But at that time was the introduction
and that was kind of my point. Now it's like, so now it's another avenue that's had to be taken for pain mitigation.
Yeah.
But clearly cannabis at that time, that would have blocked your opportunity in the NFL. So that was like that was something you stayed away from. You probably saw some other guys that fucked around with it a bit. But you're like, man, that could throw me off.
So my very first day at UVA, I get there early. I'm the first kid in my class on campus. Back then, they didn't like to let kids in early, but they let me in the first session of summer school.
No, you're
summer school.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, now they'll let you in spring. I mean, it's like, yeah.
So I get dropped off, and before my place was ready, I go over to Eagles Landing to where the upperclassmen were hanging out.
Ooh.
What do you know when I open the door?
Somebody smoking weed.
Dude, it is full. It is just lit in there, bro.
You're like, I gotta go.
I'm like,
what?
But I'm thinking like, what did I just get myself into?
Right.
I didn't see this on my visit.
Right.
That didn't pop up. And I'm like, oh, man.
Oh, You're like, okay.
I know differently now, but
but I mean, there's no way that you could have been hit with any other thoughts in that moment other than like, oh shit.
So through college, you know, I mean, you were friends with Webby in college. Through college, you're exposed to it, you see it, but you don't really smoke it, right?
Oh, dude, I was policing it.
Yeah, you were the anti guy.
I was the guy telling my teammates, like, man,
stay away from that shit. Yeah.
You guys are silly for this. And to a degree, many of them
that was true. Also,
did get in trouble. As
I was about to say, but that was absolutely true. The cannabis in even the attitudes, the laws, and everything towards cannabis today are not what they were then. So you know what I mean. So, so your statements were true, is what I'd say. Now, and we'll get to that. Yeah. Obviously, you helped get some of that modern policy changed, which is and I think this is one of the things that's probably most interesting for our listeners to and of course you've had plenty of time to think about that division in your life, the pre-cannabis, post-cannabis, and how your attitudes have evolved, even to the point where it's become one of your missions. You know what I mean? That you've had success with.
It was imperative at the time. I'm through, 7 years in the NFL.
Right.
The end of the last year, I actually played on the field. I tore my shoulder up and had a surgery. And as a result of that surgery, I had an episode taking the opioids that I was prescribed. And that event did it.
Okay.
Like freaking out, not recognizing my daughter as she was walking down the hallway. I was sitting in the lazy boy with my arm propped up.
Yep.
And I'm like, who's this kid? Like, just like goofing. I was totally out of it, man.
Completely out. And now did you accidentally take a little too? Yeah.
I was going to say,
I was just taking them on schedule.
Oh, yeah.
Like they tell you take, whatever,
which is
whether it was 1 or 2 every however many hours.
Yeah. So let's back up. Wait, let's you get through you get through college. You do your 4 years of college. You get to the point where you decide, hey, I'm good enough to be in the draft. Not only am I good enough to be in the draft, originally you were going to be the first pick in the first round, correct? Second pick?
Yeah.
So, I mean, either way, any pick in the first round is amazing. You ended up being 8th, right?
My agent the day before the draft.
Yep.
And Billy Devaney told us that they were solid. They had the second pick.
Yep.
They needed a tackle. So, man, we went out and celebrated.
Right. A little pre-celebrating. So
I'm the second pick in the draft.
That's crazy.
So second pick comes and goes.
It would have been the second time really in a row for the school. We had Chris Long come out.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And, he went to the Rams too. And I'll never forget something funny he told me on my visit there. He was like, I'm excited. He's like, come be rich with your boy. Like he was just, he was, just living life, putting in work for St. Louis, and just excited to have another.
Vermeil wasn't the coach still then, was he?
I don't remember who was coaching that team.
I know they'd won a Super Bowl not long before that. So, you end up getting drafted in the first round. Mm-hmm. You end up going and playing for Jacksonville.
Yeah. Duval.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your time in the NFL. I mean, obviously the position you played is a position that takes a hit every single play that you're on the field. What did that do to you? And at the same time, you're still not using cannabis.
Can you even, for some of the guys, including myself, can you even just give us an idea of what a day in the life of an NFL player looks like? Obviously, we see Sundays. That's about all we see. The hell does the rest of the week look like?
Depends on what point of the year we're talking about.
Great point, right?
So if it's in season, the O-line, typically the first guys meeting in the building. So by then, you've already been there for a couple of hours, doing your rehab, doing your film study, taking care of your body. And then you roll into your first meetings, and then it's, meetings and then on-field activity. Back then, my first few years in the league, you could practice twice. So if we're talking training camp, you're having padded practice in the morning.
Right.
Meetings, more meetings, padded practice in the evening.
So after you played on a Sunday, Monday, off day, Monday, Tuesday, off day?
In season, Monday, it varies. Teams sort of flop how they give their players rest the day or two after the game, but typically it's that period. You come in the next day, work out, watch film, cover everything from the game so you're prepared for the next opponent now.
Of course, right.
Focusing on this new week. And again, the schedule just kind of continues from there.
Mm-hmm. So obviously any rehab that needs to be done, any preparation for the next week, things like that. Obviously, as you get through a season, you get banged up a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. I mean,
not just getting through the seasons, but it's getting through the years, right? So each year you have injury and it's acute then, but it becomes chronic later.
Sure. And so that's where we see a lot of the danger and a lot of this pill use is some of the chronic stuff, right?
Well, the chronic injuries, for example, in my left knee, that's I heard it once in college. Then, I mean, I tore it up.
I assume that wasn't the last time that you had.
And so I remember the first year at Jacksonville, I getting my knee drained every week.
Every week.
Fluid off of my knee.
And if you're walking
on top
in,
of taking the anti-inflammatories to try to prevent the fluid from building up.
Is team doctor, telling you everything that's going on, or are they just handing you a cornucopia and saying, here, you should be taking these?
I'll say this. Nobody got the education
that they should have had.
Drugs that we
okay, and we can leave it at that, obviously. But so there is unfortunately a level of ignorance there, and which
but it also fueled some of you helping make those policy changes.
I mean, I was taking those anti-inflammatories every day.
Right.
So I guess Jaron definitely has a couple of questions he wants to ask just about your football time. Yeah. But after that, I want to get into when do you make the decision? When do you switch from, hey, I've had enough of the pills to cannabis looks interesting. How do I screw with that? But I know Jaron has some very pointed football questions that he wants to ask. So
yeah, it happened that day. A few days in
after the opiate episode, that was the moment. That was the moment. 7 years into how far into your career was that? 7. Yeah. But what was your total career?
7.
Oh, okay. So it was like
that was it.
That was it.
The end of it.
And that was end.
I had a concussion the beginning of that year.
Gotcha.
That led me to miss 4 months. And that wasn't my first concussion.
Right.
In reality, I never really healed from it either.
Right.
So I get back on the field, playing good ball, but blew my shoulder out and had a surgery in about December 15th, 2015. That's a whole nother story, just, the medical care and treatment you get as an injured athlete in the sport. But that point did it, right? Like realizing that no one said anything, but these pills are messing me up.
Right.
And I had already been studying cannabis. Like I had just been, reading the news and seeing that in Maryland, they were legalizing it for medical use. They actually tried to put it through with the university, but it failed. And so they reenacted it again. At that point, I had already invested in cannabis.
So this is 15, 16.
Yeah.
How many, so for our listeners, how many years did you do with each team, Jacksonville and the Ravens?
4.5 and 2.5.
2.5. Yeah. So that's where you were. Your beautiful wife is actually from Maryland.
So that kind of Baltimore area.
So that worked out really well for you to come up and play for Maryland. I know you got a lot of family up there. So that's a super
and it's
bonus.
For the Terps. So
it is for Maryland. It is for the Terps. But he's always going to be a Virginia guy.
No comment.
Ask him your football questions so we can keep going.
And these can even be, some of these are like some stadium questions, things like that, that are even can be like, one word answers. Don't need any ton of.
Man, what's up?
What's your favorite pro stadium?
Ooh, my favorite pro stadium, M&T Bank Stadium.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just something about being a Raven. I love the experience.
Okay.
Not to say that I didn't love and appreciate Jacksonville draft.
Right, but it was a different round. Right, sure.
It's kind of the centerpiece of the city right there, the stadium.
It was like a turning point in my life too, right? Like it was the start of like this direction I'm headed now. There's a lot of reasons why my time in Baltimore, I just cherish it. There's some guys I met in Baltimore that are some of my very best friends to this day too. So, once a Raven, always a Raven.
Always a Raven. Okay.
Not to say I don't have love for my Jacksonville family too. Of course. I did love my time in Duval. I got to fish a lot.
So just who was your favorite team growing up though?
I was a Packers fan.
Yeah,
Packers
The
fan.
first football game I watched from start to finish was the Packers winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
It was snowing. It was like a perfect sort of, Jersey evening too on a Sunday.
Yeah.
I was hooked.
That was that. All right. Got you early. What was the craziest college stadium you ever played in?
Craziest college stadium. The environment at Boston College.
Pretty wild.
Those fans were as nasty as the fans at Foxborough.
Really?
Oh, man. I got cussed out on the sideline by a kid who couldn't have been 4 years old. I'll never forget this, man. I'm like just trying to warm up. I told you I had a bunch of knee injuries, so I was on the bike on the sideline just trying to keep some blood flow going.
Right.
And this kid goes, "Get your fat off of the bike." And I'm just like, who said that? And then he said it again as I'm looking him right in his eyes. And I'm just like, this kid can't be, but like, you know what, man, let me turn around and stay focused like I usually am.
What is the most intimidating place you've ever played? I guess I can kind of roll into Boston College, but I guess maybe in like, did you ever play at Arrowhead? Did you ever play in Denver or some things like that? Arrowhead, I'm sure, would be a little bit wild to play in.
Never necessarily cared, like never had a factor of intimidation.
Right.
But I will say, and from a team perspective as well, you are certainly aware of the difference in noise from playing in.
It's got to just be more difficult.
Arrowhead and playing up in Seattle,
sure,
versus playing at MetLife where, team share stadium and, the fan base isn't quite there, and the way the stadium's built, the sound just doesn't hit on the field the way it does. Like when you're down on the middle of the field, we're operating on the road in the silent cadence because we literally can't hear each other next to each other.
So you're obviously
you're just screaming
watching
in the huddle trying to give us the play. And so, we create these movements that the center does to notify everybody when we're going to snap the ball.
Right.
Because you can't hear it, almost hurts your ears.
Well, even like I don't even know how they're able to call a play. I mean, I hear some of these plays. I'll be watching Mahomes call a play on quarterback, whatever, on Netflix.
Yeah,
and
sometimes it's completely
and I'm
silent. Like there's silent cues for calling in plays as well.
And of course there's a lot of signaling on the side. But it's the noise would have to be very difficult to deal with. What would you say is your fondest football memory?
Fondest football memory. To the Baltimore. I'll never forget it.
All right, fair enough.
I'm watching Dragon Ball Super with my wife in the living room. My agent calls me. Sonny.
Yeah.
Sonny calls me. He's like, "Hey, Gene, like, get ready. You're going to Baltimore." It's kind of all he said. I'm just like, bro, what are you talking about? It's, what was it, a Tuesday night?
Right,
watching Dragon Ball, like I kind of didn't hear him. Like I didn't think he was. I thought he was messing with me. It's like, yo, you go in tomorrow. The deal's not quite done, but you're going to Baltimore, and I just start celebrating. Like I am beside myself.
You're like, babe, we put in the house. I know you had the house on the market the next morning, probably.
I'll be honest, for a lot of reasons, right? So there was regime change while I was there.
Yeah,
right.
And quite frankly, things just were not working out.
Yeah. I mean, dude.
Rest in peace, George Yarno, but he and I did not see eye to eye on many issues. I tried to work with him. It just didn't work out. That's just what it was. And thankfully, I ended up in a better situation. And just love the environment, like the be yourself, but like we're down to business every moment of the day.
And Baltimore's hard, bro.
Yeah.
Baltimore's hard. They don't mess around,
you can't, like, look at the city. Like,
Dirty Bird, man. They got that Ravens attitude.
It's real like that.
And and for those who don't know, Baltimore definitely has a rough history when it comes to football with the Colts leaving and then a lot of people having to go, just, you know, go to a different team as
Dude,
far
there was
as
a different love for the team
so when
in Baltimore than what we had in Jacksonville. Like we had tarps in the stadium at that time. Like Jacksonville has, you know, done some things. They stocked up, you know, quite a bit of money to buy a team, right? The year they made a splash in free agency,
right?
Kind of put pieces together over time. But back then, I mean, it was tough times.
Yeah.
I remember the web.com logos covering like most of the stadium. It was an embarrassment.
Yeah.
The games were blacked out.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any regrets that you had in football? I mean, it seems like you've been pretty, you know, kind of go with the flow.
Man, I gave the game everything.
Sounds like you gave it 100.
I mean, I put myself and all of myself into, you know, anything I decided to do. And I certainly gave ball everything I had. And the point when I retired, you know, I took that off season. I trained my ass off.
Mm-hmm.
You lost a lot of weight.
Yeah, I actually put weight back on too, because I played the last season pretty lean, and I just wanted to come back bigger and stronger. And so my rehab went really well. You know, I got my weight back on. I was cleared to play, plenty strong and physically.